So I hope everyone had a good break, good lunch, good salat. Can anyone hear me? Hear me clearly? Okay, that's good. All right. Alhamdulillah. Okay, prior to getting to the third session here, first off I want to tell you what the third session is going to be about. I'm going to be going over the initial arguments that I gave you from the atheist side, and we're going to talk about them in a critical manner. Okay, we're going to talk about them in a refutation-like manner. Okay, so I'm going to give you answers, how to answer these arguments, all right, in a very sufficient way. Secondly, after that, we're going to get into the arguments regarding science or scientific miracles in the Quran, see if they're valid after we have just discussed the nature of science, and some of the ayahs in the Quran that mention supposedly scientific miracles. Prior to that, however, I thought that I might give you a little bit more background as to my journey, I guess, to Islam, since I think that would be beneficial for today's lecture. I told you earlier that I have been studying philosophy for the past 6 years, 7 years. Prior to this, in 2008, I had converted to Islam, 2008, so I've been Muslim for about, 7 years now? It seems like it's been much longer than that, alhamdulillah. But I remember some of the intellectual arguments that made me into a Muslim. And I remember some of the emotional things that made me into a Muslim. But I wanted to share with you some of the intellectual ones. And before this, I was a Christian. And at the time when I was studying philosophy, it helped me to be critical of myself and my beliefs. So I was constantly questioning myself to see whether or not what I believed was true. So I began to lose interest in Christianity as an intellectual belief, because there were a lot of things in Christianity that I found to be contradictory and problematic, and I will discuss with you those in a moment. But prior to that, I studied Buddhism, I studied Taoism, I studied Judaism, I studied Hinduism, I studied all sorts of beliefs, and none of them appealed to me at all. And to be honest with you, I didn't study Islam. I didn't study Islam because in the United States, as you happen to know, it's not exactly a good thing if you convert to Islam in the community, because there's a lot of Islamophobia in the United States. Okay, it's very difficult to live a normal life there as a Muslim, which I learned the hard way as well. Now, so I stayed away from Islam as a result of that until I met a friend of mine in philosophy course. He happened to be a Shia, go figure, and we talked philosophy here and there, and he invited me to his masjid. So I went there, and I at the time I didn't know the difference between Shia and Sunni and things like this. So I talked to the Imam. We started discussing, started debating. And he was good. He's really good. I don't know what they do in Iran, but they know their philosophy really well. So we got at it for a while, for 6 months. 6 months I was talking to him, right, going back and forth to the masjid. And I was interested, because these guys were smart, you know. And one day he told me, he said to me, my name wasn't Ali or Asadullah back then, so I'm not going to tell you my name, but he said to me, I don't care if you become Shia or Sunni. I just want you to become Muslim. So he told me, if you want to become Sunni, you will become Sunni, it's okay. So, and then I started studying the difference between Shia and Sunni, so I became Sunni. Okay, I actually still know him, and I visit him from time to time when I go back to the States. So we have little discussions here and there. This time about Shia and Sunni, not about Christianity and Islam. So, but I remember during that time, one argument that he threw at me, and it was very difficult to refute. And this is the time that I realized that there's something interesting about this. There's something about this religion that makes people like this. They can think this way, They have this sort of openness, this ability to be critical. It's very difficult to find in other faiths. And there's something about this religion that makes them so devout, and I'm talking about Muslims in general, that not only are they intellectual in many degrees, in their education and the way they live their life, but the way they live is like they actually live their religion. In Christianity, you don't live your religion. Christianity, like I said earlier, you live like any other body else. You believe Jesus died, and that's it. Khalas, you go to church, you sing or something, and then you go, and there's nothing really connecting you in that sense. So Islam offered both to me an intellectual, remedy, and at the same time it offered a lifestyle remedy. It offered a way of living, a real religion, as a real religion should. So I told you I was going to tell you the intellectual argument. I've been using this against Christians since day one, since I've learned it, and it works very well. So maybe I'll teach you right now, and you can use it against your friends who are Christian, if you have any, or just anybody you're looking to make da'wah to, who's in the Christian community. So here's how philosophy has helped me to be critical, and here's how it's going to help you. Okay, I don't need the board, I don't think, right? No. So let's here's the argument. Premise one. Remember premises? Okay. Premise one. All right. God is perfect, right? God is perfect. Everyone believes this. Christians believe this as well, but for them, perfection also means the inability to change. I believe it's for us as well. Christians believe in the immutability, meaning the unchangeability of God. All right? So God cannot change. All right? Okay, so we got that down. So God is perfect. Premise two. God sacrificed his only son to save you. That's the Christian belief, right? God sacrificed Jesus, his only son, to save mankind. Right? Okay. Premise three. Sacrifice, the word sacrifice means to lose something. Uh-oh. You see where I'm going? Okay. So what happens when you lose something?
You don't get it back.
Well, you don't. It's not about not getting it back, but something. What happens? What happens when you lose something? Look at the first premise. What was the first premise? What does perfection mean?
Complete change.
Doesn't change, right? So when you lose something, what happens? You change.
So you contradict.
Premise four. A loss implies change. Therefore, the Christian God is not perfect. Done. That's it. No need to talk about Jesus being divine or anything like that. It's done. So, okay. So that's always been a very effective argument. I've never seen any Christians object to it in a very good way. So,
I missed it.
you missed it? Too bad. So, now that we've discussed that argument, should we move on, or should I continue talking about my conversion story? Go ahead. Woo. All right. So, okay, so I'll continue for a little longer than that. I eventually became convinced of Islam, but I didn't convert until 6 months after that. And the reason why is because I was scared. I was terrified. Because when you convert to Islam in the United States, something happens to you. You are seen as enemy number one by just about everyone, even the Muslims. So they question, like, is he with us, or is he like the CIA or something? They do that. I'm serious. And then you go into the masjid, and it's like, there's a white guy. No, but there is actually a lot of racism, unfortunately, in the United States. It's funny, especially with marriage, a lot of the convert brothers, they like to joke, they go to the masjid when they convert, and all the brothers are hugging them like, Alhamdulillah, mashallah, you've converted, you're welcome to my house, I feed you, you can be like my son, can I marry your daughter? She will never marry a guri. Never marry a white man, right? So they get like, it's very interesting in that respect. So, on one hand, but there's positive experiences too, don't get me wrong. I learned how to withstand Indian food very quickly because when I converted, it was like a month before Ramadan. So when in Ramadan, when you're fasting, you have iftar, you have to eat what's in front of you. You can't like be like, okay, can we order McDonald's or something? No. So you're at the masjid and they give you the food. So it's my first time eating spicy Indian food. And I'm hungry. So I really have no choice. So I learned how to get used to it very quickly. So that was a blessing. But I remember my experience in a more serious manner. I remember my experience 3 years I was in the United States as a convert. I lost my job. I lost every friend I had. And I was homeless for about a year. And I remember a lot of events that occurred that were very difficult for me. Just to give you kind of an understanding of what happens there. You can't pray in public. You can, but you can't. It's legal, but you better not. People throw things at you. People try to hurt you. Sometimes you have to find a dressing room to pray, so nobody sees what you're doing. There's no halal food anywhere. So if you're going to convert, you're going to have to either become a vegetarian or eat fish. Okay? The nearest masjid might be about 45 minutes away. So going to Jummah is not exactly easy. Every day in the news you hear about how Muslims are bad and they're trying to take over the world, which I'm okay with. I'm fine. I want to take over the world, but I'm perfectly okay with that. But being terrorist and things like this, people give you dirty looks all the time. When you're at the airport, you should expect to get pulled to the side and spoken to for a while about where you're going and why. It's not always extreme like that. There's some good people too, but it's getting worse. So when I decided to make hijrah to Malaysia, it was for my education, but also for the sake of the fact that I just didn't want to live in the United States anymore. It was very difficult. And sometimes I think to myself, am I being a coward? Because my mentor is actually Noman Ali Khan. He's the one who sent me to university. And we were very close to each other for a while. And I remember him, he's still there, so I feel like, did I make the right decision? He's still there, he's giving dawah, and yet I'm over here. Not to say Malaysia's bad. I'm just saying that, why did I... But, so I don't know if I should go back, but...
Not until tomorrow.
Not until tomorrow, that's true. No. So. But, it's not easy. And, but Muslims, sometimes they have good experiences too. It depends on where you are. I happen to live in a very volatile, very hostile area, so it wasn't easy. And, every day, like I said, you hear about how evil you are. And it's a difficult situation to be in. So when I came to Malaysia I remember the first thing I did, actually. When I came to the airport, I saw the Burger King. 3 years I didn't have burger. Okay. I went there, I had a Whopper. It was the happiest moment of my life. After my conversion. Okay. I finally had a halal burger.
How many?
3 years.
No, how many was it? Don't tell, it's okay.
Okay, I actually remember. So, a Whopper and a Whopper Junior, but that's fine. And I remember being able to pray anywhere I wanted to. That was awesome. And I didn't have to worry about anybody hurting me. That was great. I remember being able to go to any mosque. I remember, there's a lot of things, the positive things that Malaysia has done in my life. And being able to study Islam, that was a big deal for me. So even though I didn't study traditional, I studied like Islamic philosophy and things, but even that was still something that I value to this day. And I always thank Malaysia for, regardless of my criticisms of politics and other things like this. But I always thank the people, and I always thank the institutions, and I always thank the fact that they gave me a place to come when I had nowhere else to go. And I thank Malaysia for being here. Because there's a lot of us in the United States and elsewhere in the Western world that don't have it that easy. And I can tell you right now, if you go to the United States or Europe, you might have some good experiences. I'm not saying everyone's bad, but you have it here so easy. You have no idea. Maybe some of you do. But it's not easy for a lot of us. So it's not just an intellectual move when you convert. It's also a whole lifestyle change. And that can also include the complete rejection by your community. So, in any regard, I'm now here, and inshallah, I hope that one day I can return to the United States when it's less hostile. And I guess maybe one more thing I'll tell you. I should have mentioned it earlier, but I remember when 9/11 happened. I was sitting in, was it my freshman class in high school? It was a long time ago. And I remember the TV came on, and my principal, he was over the loudspeaker. He was like that, He's like, attention students, please be seated. He said, the United States is under attack. I was like, oh, this is ridiculous. This couldn't be happening. I turned on the TV. The moment we turned on the TV in the classroom, we saw the second plane hit. And we saw the people jumping out of the buildings to their deaths. It was a very traumatic experience. And so you're probably wondering, after seeing that, why did I even bother with Islam? Why did I even try? The thing is, I think the best way to explain it, and I mentioned it kind of earlier before, is that we had to meet a Muslim, to get rid of the prejudice, to get rid of that hatred. We need to meet a Muslim. And I think the best form of da'wah, to be honest with you, is not this. The best form of da'wah is to have good manners, good etiquettes, to show people what it really is like to be a Muslim. Because had that not been the case, even though my friend was Shia, if he wouldn't have been kind, and if he would have just been like, you're a kafir, I'm not going to talk to you, then I would have never bothered to go to his masjid. And I would never convert, I would never be here. So, that's all I want to say on a personal note. So let's get back to the brain drain. All right, is everyone ready for this? Are we okay now? I didn't make you sad, did I? I feel really bad if I did. So, okay, so the primary atheist arguments. We discussed this in session 1, and I wanted to talk about them again because I want to offer you the refutations for these. So the primary atheist arguments. The first one is the argument for anti-theism, and if you've, can you put the full argument, please? Can you put the full one? Yeah, just put the whole, yeah, there we go, okay. So, as we remember, any belief that teaches false views about the natural world and ethics should be opposed. Theistic religions teach false views about the natural world and ethics, therefore theistic religion should be opposed. Now, whenever an atheist offers you this argument, the first thing you do is you must oppose premise 2 by simply asking a question. And this is a very simple question. You say, you believe that theistic religions teach false views about the natural world and ethics. Can you please prove to me that's the case? Okay. And then you will understand where the argument is going to go from there. Now, usually an atheist will respond by suggesting that the Quran, for instance, teaches about things like flat earth, or about the fact that, or it teaches about other physical phenomena that are not true, okay? And that can be countered in one way, and then ethics. But let's get to the first one. So I told you I was going to discuss the Quran and science. Okay. After understanding the nature of science, I'm going to ask you a question now. I know some of you are tired, but I'm going to ask you a question. After understanding what science actually is, that it's not absolute fact, that it changes over time, that it's based on theory construction, Can the Quran be scientific? Anybody want to answer? Is everyone scared to answer?
Scientific.
You say yes or no. So, I mean, it doesn't, I'm not going to punish you if you say the wrong one, don't worry. No? Who says no? Oh, who says yes? A lot of people undecided. Okay. Let me ask the question again. If science is constantly changing, for instance, if theories are changing, for instance, like the Big Bang. The Big Bang is, the theory is actually starting to change considerably based on quantum physics. Okay? So other theories as well. If they are constantly changing and science is constantly changing, can the Quran, based on the definition of science, be scientific?
No.
Why? Because it doesn't change.
I still think that's possible because if there are scientific facts, not theories, not hypotheses, like for example, the shape of earth you already know, it will not change.
That is true. Observable fact. We call that empirical fact. So let's say that there are obvious observations in the Quran. Does that necessarily make it scientific? For instance, if the Quran mentions trees, would I say that's a scientific miracle? Alhamdulillah. No, of course not.
Let's look at mountains being pegs.
Okay.
Right?
Use mic, please.
Mountain. How do you?
We're doing a back and forth? Let's go. Go. Okay, you first. I'm ready. Huh?
For example, Quran says mountains. Quran mentions mountains as having functions as pegs. And geologists confirm that that's the case. Mountains has a function, and they work as a pegs for our tectonic plates movements and so on.
Okay.
So if this is a known fact, coincidentally, it's also mentioned in the Quran. Allah mentions it. How can it be unscientific?
Because the point is that scientific, remember the definition of science is what? No, that's false. I mentioned falsifiability is actually an older concept. Science is based on what? Theory selection. Right? Also, that's what we consider normal science. So we have also experimentation, etc. Based on what though? Based on the theory's construction, based on the theory's interpretation of the data in question, right? So, but what about observable fact, just direct observable fact? Okay, so let's go to your mountains example. The Quran does say that the mountains stabilize the earth, correct? Now, is this informing us of contemporary geological fact regarding the theory of how it interprets, or is it talking about a common sense observation? What if I were to tell you it's talking about a common sense observation? Would it be possible?
Possible.
It's possible. Has anybody ever been in an earthquake?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Very bad, isn't it?
Yes.
It's terrible. Even actually in Saudi Arabia, there are earthquakes. They occur on a very small scale, but they do occur. Now, are there mountains around the Middle East, basically? Are there any mountains? Yes, various mountains, right? Because there are fault lines, correct? Do some of the people live on the mountains? Have some people lived on mountains before this?
Yes.
Can anybody tell me where an earthquake feels more intense? On the mountain or below the mountain?
On the mountain.
No,
Below the mountain.
below.
Below the mountain.
Below the mountain. Why?
Tectonic plates.
When the plates collide, right, together, or they push together like this, and it pushes up the earth, okay? The more earth that pushes up, the more compact, stronger it gets, okay? So you know when you have a lot of material coming in at once, it's very difficult to keep pushing, because of the pressure, right? So it gets more stable and slower, okay? So when you're on top of a mountain, all right, and there's shaking, but it's compact, somebody try pushing me. Would anybody like to push me? Okay. Now say if I'm like this, you just push me. Just push me. Okay, just put anywhere, it's fine. Just put, okay. Now, if I lock down, now try to push me. Okay. See? So the friction, or the pressure, is holding me down. So the same way that when material collides, okay, it causes more stability for that area. Now, it's still dangerous when an earthquake happens in a mountain. You still might die. But unlike the base of the mountain, where there's no pressure like that, and the earth is free to move, all right, your chances of dying are much higher. So when the Quran was revealed to the Arabs, who probably happened to live in certain locations like that, they understood instinctively that the Quran was correct in this regard, because when they're on the mountain, they're like, okay, it's not so bad. But they see down there, and the town's been completely destroyed. It's a very commonsensical belief. It's very easy to understand. I'll give you another example. The Quran says the earth is flat. Does it?
What is the Arabic word? Dahaha?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Vast expanse?
Yes. So many atheists will claim that the Quran mentions that the earth is flat.
Okay.
This is very common because the earth, it says in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the earth flat for you. Does that mean the earth is flat? Who believes the earth is flat?
Is that supposed to be a literal meaning? That it's flat? Is it supposed to be a literal meaning?
The word is literal, but the meaning is not. I'll tell you what the meaning is. But anybody know what the earth is flat?
Sorry?
Anyone believe the earth is flat?
Yeah, I believe that's flat.
You believe the earth is flat?
To some
Why?
extent.
No. Stop it. The earth is not flat. Okay. It is not flat. All right. So what is the Quran saying? In that reference, if you look at some of the traditional tafsir, you will notice that they mention is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the earth flat, it's an analogy to Arab hospitality. Okay? When an Arab Bedouin is in the desert, all right, is the desert flat or is it hilly? It's not flat. It can usually be very uncomforting. Okay? Even in a rockier terrain, it's still quite unstable. So when an Arab pitches his tent, what does he do before he pitches the tent? Flattens out the earth to make it comfortable and stable. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in that ayah is that He's making the earth habitable for human beings. That's it. It doesn't, so like when you roll out a carpet, right? You flatten it out. Okay. What about the 3 veils around the fetus? The 3 veils around the darkness around the fetus? A lot of atheists claim that this is unscientific because a lot of Muslims claim that it is referring to a microbiological event. However, that's not the case. Even at the naked eye, during the fetus, certain stages of development, you can see the birthing sac and the various veils that the baby goes through during its development stage. This is also known by the Greeks. Galen was a little bit off on it, but he was kind of close in describing what it was. So what I'm trying to say is that the Quran itself only identifies observable, direct, some things that the Arabs already knew about. Because what the Quran is trying to teach us is not about physical phenomenon. That's not the point. What is beneficial about that? What is beneficial about telling me, oh, here's the shape of the earth? There's nothing beneficial in that. The Quran was sent as a reminder. It was sent as a reminder, and it was sent for us to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was meant for us also to be grateful to Him. Many times when the Quran references physical phenomenon, it is trying to get us to understand the benefits of creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions the cattle on many occasions. He mentions the ocean, He mentions the ships. He says, look at all these things I've given you. Which of your Lord's favors do you deny? Right? I'll give you another reason, actually 2 evidences, that the Quran is not talking about scientific miracles. First off, from the scholar Al-Shatibi, 13th century, there was actually a time period when some scholars were actually thinking that there were scientific miracles in the Quran. So this is not a recent phenomenon. It occurred before, but in a more minor fashion. It wasn't as popular as today. And he argued against them by saying, you're trying to tell me that your scientific theories have been predicted in the Quran when the Arabs, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet himself didn't know about this? You're trying to tell me when the ayahs were revealed to them, they had no clue what was being said? Because they wouldn't have understood what you're saying. The information that we have now would have never been understood by the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. They would have, if you were like plate tectonics, they would have been like, what is...
What if he answers you that Quran is supposed to be a miracle of time, of all time?
Okay.
And it fulfills the purpose for the people of that time. And today the knowledge has developed. And even then, the meanings of Quran can derive and can be up to date with the latest...
Yeah, can Quran has multiple layers of meaning?
It has multiple layers of meaning, which has already been admitted by the ulama themselves. However, that's a very dangerous course to take when you're talking about changing meanings over time. The Quran does not change meanings over time.
It have more than one meaning.
It does have...
One interpretation.
The Quran, multiple ayahs have, or basically all of them have very different meanings. However, they don't change over time. They don't change. The Quran is static, meaning that it is a living document, but in the sense that it speaks to us in our time period based on the situations and based on the context of those ayahs were revealed in. So basically we understand our lives in context of how the Prophet ﷺ and his companions lived and how the Quran was directed to them. And then we try to apply that to our daily situation. However, to suggest the Quran changes over time based on our arbitrary and subjective understanding is to suggest that the Quran doesn't actually have a set meaning. That is problematic. And I think it's a very dangerous path to go on. And I'm not saying that and I'm not trying to be rude when I say that, but what I'm trying to say is that we cannot make the Quran unlimited in interpretation based on the time in which it's revealed, or in which it's been read in. Okay, that's very, very, very problematic. And there's actually no dalil for that at all. When the ulama have referred to the Quran as a living document, they refer to it as the impact, its influence upon humankind throughout the centuries, not its scientific or factual information. It has nothing to do with, the Quran was not sent for that purpose. And the other evidence I want to give you is this, and I mentioned it earlier in a private discussion. Does anybody here know about the Islamic Golden Age? When science flourished in the Muslim world? Okay. Now, ask yourself a question. If the Big Bang, if plate tectonics, if all these things were revealed in the Quran during that time, first off, why didn't the Arabs find out? Why didn't the Muslims figure it out by that time? And secondly, why did they even bother to research these things if they're already answered in the Quran? What would be the point? If the Quran had given answers to scientific phenomena already, then why would the Arabs feel the necessity to go and research about the scientific world? They wouldn't need to if they actually believed that their science was already answered in the Quran. Well, you know, if it says, oh, there's a Big Bang here, okay, well, we're not going to look at the stars, whatever. But they didn't, because they did not interpret the Quran in that fashion. They interpreted it in a much more personal, and much more what we call teleological, meaning purposeful way. They saw the natural phenomenon as being for them, as being a benefit for them, and a reminder for them to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not as a, here is how the universe is. Okay, is a blueprint for some scientific theory. The Quran does not need science to be valid. It does not need any sort of observable fact to be valid. Now, does the Quran talk about observable facts? Yes, like I just mentioned, but in a very vague way, in a way that, you know, we can't put too much interpretation into it. Okay. So, in that way, I would say that would be the best way to oppose this sort of view regarding how the Quran somehow gets things wrong about the natural world. Likewise, I want to mention that this interpretation of the Quran as having scientific miracles is very recent in popularity, and it has been influenced by what? Scientism. Very much influenced by scientism. Because people have been taking science as absolute fact, and they assume that because science is absolute fact, it must be in the Quran. So in order to prove the Quran to non-believers, they go, okay, let's go see where we can find. And they say, oh look, this is the Big Bang, oh this is this. But that's because of their ignorance of what science really is and the fact that it'll change. And those people who do that, and I'm not trying to be rude, but those people who do that will feel very foolish in about 10 years when that theory changes. And then they have to explain away what they said before. Oh, the Quran didn't say that. You know? So we have to be very careful about how we force interpretations in there. The only interpretations we should accept are the ones that our traditional ulama have already told us about. Okay, I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't have open minds, but we should trust their authority in this regard. We should trust their learning in this regard, and we should not try to impose anything other than what is reasonable within their boundaries, within their understanding. The moment we start to throw things in there from different ideologies and beliefs, the moment we start to have things like liberal Islam, like once again I'm picking on sisters in Islam, I'm sorry, but we have things like this. Oh, the Quran doesn't really say that because we're living in a new time. They use the same argument. You notice that? Sisters in Islam? We shouldn't lash people, that's barbaric. That was for back then. And then they called the Prophet ﷺ barbaric, astaghfirullah. Because they say that our time is better. We're more moral than the Prophet ﷺ. That's what they say. They're saying that, they're implying it when they say that. Because now we live in a better time. So this is the problem, we cannot do this. Okay, there are many grave consequences for interpreting the Quran in a way of time frame. And this is also based on the belief of what? Progressionism. The false belief that we're continuously advancing in the way of ethics and morality. If we actually believe this, like many atheists do, we'll be opposing the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. We'll be opposing them because they were the best of us. So by saying that we are better now, we are rejecting that. And that is wrong because the Prophet ﷺ said something completely opposite of progression. He said that after me there will be 3 good generations, and then after that, the ummah will go like this. And there was also another prophecy that was made. What was that? How will knowledge be lost in the end of time?
The death of scholars.
The death of scholars. So how are we to assume that we know more about the Quran and the Sunnah and how to interpret that than they did? The Prophet ﷺ already prophesies that we will lose knowledge and that we will lose our ethical behavior. And yet we're standing here saying we are better. Astaghfirullah. I will definitely say that's kufr. That's definitely kufr. So, I promised Brother Rehan that I would not be harsh today, but I have to say for that one. Okay. So I apologize. That one makes me very angry. So, in terms of ethics, atheists usually typically say that Islam, for instance, or Christianity are barbaric because of the punishments. All right? And we're going to get into that more into tomorrow, where I'll be discussing some of the main arguments used against Islam, like slavery, okay, the age of Aisha, right? I'll be discussing that. I actually wrote a 3-article academic piece about defending her marriage with the Prophet ﷺ, okay? And I proved that she was mature at the age of 9 based on evolutionary theory. So I know that sounds strange to you, but I'll prove it to you tomorrow. Okay? I also have discussed about other issues against Islam. Some people will mention What else is another one? That Islam promotes violence and terrorism. It's another common objection we'll get into. We will also discuss the punishments in Islam, whether they're extreme or not. Some people say it's extreme to lash people, for instance, or it's extreme to cut off the hand, or it's extreme to stone and things like this. But if you look at their standards, they're actually more extreme. I'll give you one example. If somebody kills somebody in Islam, what happens? There's two things that can happen. Three, actually. The family can forgive, blood money, or execution, right? Okay, what happens in civil courts? There's no forgiveness. In many countries, Western countries, there's no execution either. Life in prison. Can somebody tell me which one's more unfair? I commit the act of murder, hypothetically. Please don't say it. So, hypothetically, I commit the act of murder. I kill somebody. I take their life, right? They're no longer living. Does that mean I deserve to suffer for the next 50, 60 years in a prison cell? So I didn't do that to them. I didn't torture them for 50, 60 years. I just killed them. I took their life, right? Well, not just killed is bad, but But what's worse, torturing me for 50 years in a cell where I live like an animal in a cage, or just taking your life away? Which one suffers longer? In the cage. Is that fair? How about this? I steal something, and I go to the same cage with all the murderers and the rapists because I stole something really valuable. Or you cut my hand off, I don't steal again, I go back into society. Which one do you think is more fair? You think about it for a while. It's okay. Live with a disability, but go back into society, go back to my family, be able to live. I paid the consequence. Or stay in jail for the rest of my life, or a very long period of time, away from my family, away from society, among other criminals. Is that fair? I don't know. I don't think so. So we will discuss the philosophical arguments, actually, or the ethical argument, the Islamic arguments, for why our punishment system is better than civil law. Okay? Can we go to the next slide? Sorry. Primary atheist arguments. Number 2, the argument for irrationality of theism religion. Any claim that lacks evidence is unjustified. Unjustified claims are irrational. Theism and religion lack evidence, therefore theism and religion are irrational. This is where we get a little clever. This is a very simple argument to refute. Does anybody want to try? There's something wrong with one of the premises, and it has to do with being self-refuting.
Self-refuting.
Which one? Thank you. Any claim that lacks evidence is unjustified. What about this claim?
It refutes the conclusion.
That's it. It's done. The argument itself lacks evidence, so therefore it's unjustified. There's no evidence for the position. The claim itself, that any claim that lacks evidence is unjustified, which is why I disagree with the fact that we always need evidence for stuff. That's why I believe that the fitrah is enough to rationalize belief in God. And also other things. And I'll give you an example. I walk outside today. I go outside and I see a tree. Okay? I just see a tree. There's a tree in front of me. And I go, that's a tree. Now, I just saw the tree. Okay? Now, here's how an atheist would act if they were to follow themselves consistently. They walk outside, they see the tree, and they go, I don't know if that's a tree or not. I think I'm going to need to take some some evidence of this. I need to take some bark, see if it's plastic or something, Can you imagine living like that? Everything you see, you're like, I don't know if this is real, There are certain beliefs that are just self-evident. There's certain things that we don't have to question. And if we look at Thomas Kuhn, for instance, remember when I mentioned him? He said that science works in paradigms and they change because of anomalies. In the same way, he was actually talking about the way that we think. Think about it. When you're born into this world, do you reject everything the moment you come in? Do you go, you know what, I don't know if this is my mom. I don't know if this is food. Is this healthy for me? No, we're gullible. But we're naturally like that, even throughout our entire lives. Now, it's not okay to be always gullible, but 90% of the time it is. 90% of the time. I don't walk outside and think that, is this world real? I don't have any evidence for that. Maybe I shouldn't be walking here. It could be dangerous. I don't do that. We take for granted a lot of things because we have to in order to live in the world that we live in. If we go outside and the first thing we think is this real or not, we will never get anything done. We'll never do anything. We'll never move past that because it's already something that we assume before we even get started. Okay? Before knowledge can even take place, before evidence can even be asked for, we have to believe that those things exist. So we can't always be questioning everything. I'll give you another example. This is a normal example. If you're in the desert, anybody ever been in the desert? Hajj. Alhamdulillah. So, have you ever seen a mirage? Seen a mirage? Okay. Now imagine if you didn't know anything about a mirage. What do you probably think you're seeing? Water? Right? Do you think it's irrational that you're seeing water? Why? Why do you think it's irrational that you're seeing water? There could be water. There's water in the desert. It's possible. If you see it, it seems like it's water to you. So in actuality, it's not irrational to think that in the beginning it's water. Now when you walk up to it, you realize, oh, there's no water here. Now, you have a reason to doubt. Because okay. So this could be fake in the future. So now I know that if I see something like that, it might not be water. But in the beginning, when you first experience it, you're rational to believe that, it's water. So let's go back to the tree example. I see trees all the time. I walk outside, and I look at this tree, and it goes, and I say, there's a tree, and somebody comes up and goes, no, that's a fake, it's a picture. I say, what? And the first thing I'm going to say is, no, I don't think so. You need to prove it to me. See now how it's switched around? See, this is common for me to understand. I understand this as being a tree, so you need to prove to me that it's not a tree. I don't have to prove to you that, this is a very normal thing for me to look at, right? So then I go up and then I find out it's a picture. Okay, now I might second guess next time I come out and see this, right? But in the beginning, there's no reason for me to second guess myself. That'd be ridiculous. It'd be absolutely ridiculous. We only doubt when we have reason to. When we experience an anomaly, better said. When we experience anomalies, then we start to feel, okay, now there's something to question. Now there's something wrong here. But normally, we do not act like that. And if we did, we wouldn't survive. Not a day. So, and that also works with the argument for design. You've heard of this argument? Everyone thinks, they look outside, they say, oh, look how complex the world is. It looks designed. It must be created by a creator, right? But this is a very commonsensical belief. It's very commonsensical because we as humans, we create things much simpler than this whole universe. So why is it such a big leap to think, hey, there could be a much greater intelligence here? There's nothing, extraordinary about that claim. There's nothing extraordinary about it. It's very commonsensical. So when I think the world's designed, it's not up to me to prove, because it seems like that. It very well seems that way. Now, until I feel that there's something to doubt that understanding, then I can start to, come up with a different theory. But in the meantime, it's a perfectly logical explanation. The same way that we see a watch, or we see any sort of other mechanical object, the same way we see the world, which is much more complex and functions at a much higher level than what we're capable of. So in a way, we have a right to think, maybe there's something more intelligent. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, probably it's not right to say that Quran is scientific, because in your perspective, scientific is something which is construed upon theory and so on. Okay? Fine, I can agree with that. If you say Quran is not scientific, I can agree. But like for example, Zakir Naik, the view he took was Quran and modern science, especially the facts, are compatible, which means they don't contradict. It appears so. Like, for example, if we take the example of the embryology, Professor Dr. Keith Moore how he his experience, how he read that Surah Al-Alaq, and he had to revise his book, and he won Nobel Prize, and he went on YouTube and commented and all that. So that also proves to us that our modern knowledge, the facts, the formation of a baby and so on, the embryo, those stage and all that, Quran does touch those topics. And because we know Quran, the author is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, so we know that this is true. And hence, now that we know that science has made progress and they have established these facts, so what is wrong in saying that these two pieces of information are compatible? Because they're saying the same thing.
The problem I have with it is because of two things, actually. One is because I don't believe the initial intention of the Quran was for that reason. And two is because the Quran is speaking in a very vague and foundational fashion. And this is not, I agree with, if you're saying that Zakir Naik says there's compatibility, there's no contradiction between the two. I agree with you in that respect. However, I would not go so far as to ascribe, our current understanding of things to what the intention of that ayah was. Because I think it was being very general and basic.
I do agree with you. But we, in comparative religion, especially doing da'wah to non-Muslim, this particular field or this particular knowledge or this particular method has been very useful.
Yes.
Okay? For example, if we look at Dr. Keith Moore, if I'm not mistaken, he became Muslim. If I'm not mistaken, I have not seen his Shahada per se. A scientist who became Muslim, did he become Muslim by the way?
I don't recall actually.
Anybody knows about
But I want to mention that you said that it's very useful, right? I agree that it can be useful, but it can also be detrimental. And I'll give you an example, a very big example. In the United States, there is a group called, I'm mentioning them by name, not to, the organization by name, not to belittle them, but to show you the problem. Okay, they're called Gain Peace. They do a lot of work.
Sorry?
Gain Peace, and what they do is that this is their main form of da'wah. They go around and they claim that there's science in the Quran. Okay, out of all the converts that they get, 60% apostate in the first year, and largely due to this. Because when they look in the Quran and they start debating with atheists and things like this, they start to realize that this is not exactly the case. And so they become doubtful of the Quranic message. And that's why I say it's dangerous to ascribe scientific phenomenon, especially in a modern context, to the Quran, because the Quran is so vague. It's almost, it's just not saying what we're saying. It's saying what it wants to say by itself, and for a different reason other than to describe physical attributes or physical phenomenon in the most detailed of forms. So, because once again we go back to the argument about the early, the Sahabi and the Prophet ﷺ understanding these messages. If they were revealed in the context that we understand them today in terms of modern science, they would have not understood that at all. It's impossible. So for them, the way they understood it is the way that we should understand it. That's what I'm trying to argue. In order for us to be closest to the interpretation of the Quran and how it's supposed to be understood, we should understand it how the Prophet ﷺ understood it and the Sahabi. That's how we should understand it. So if they understood it as being this way, that's the meaning of the verse. That's it. The more that we try to pile onto it, the more problems we create. So I'm not trying to say it's blasphemy or anything to do this necessarily, but what I am trying to say is that we should not, out of just pure caution. Because, and not because I doubt the Quran, because I'm doubtful of science.
No, could I just add a little bit? For example, these people don't say that it's a new meaning altogether, and the previous meaning is, abrogated or cannot be taken completely. What they're saying, it could have multiple meanings.
It's like an enhancement or something of that sort.
I don't know what enhancement means.
Enhancement meaning that it's like a complementary, it's an additional information.
Yeah, additional information.
I'm still wary. And like I said, it's for no other reason than just to be careful.
you don't champion the agenda, I can understand, but
Yeah.
I'm stopping people from using Quran and science as a mode of da'wah if they selectively use it.
I would prefer they do not. I'm not going to make a fatwa or anything, saying that you can't do it, but I think it's very dangerous. I think it's extremely dangerous. I think it should be straight. You should stray away from it as much as you possibly can. I just don't think it's beneficial. And
I have read one tafsir, if I'm not mistaken, by Ibn Taymiyyah. It was a verse about Earth rotating, and
it's
it's like someone tying
swim.
his sarban. In Arabic, the word was kunwara. See, I have read. I think Ibn Taymiyyah said, we don't know what it means, but this is what is mentioned in Quran. We don't really know what Allah is trying to tell us. Maybe the future generation will know.
Yeah.
So you see, even the ulamas before know that could be the people later will know something. The hidayah will come.
Yeah.
We have
more
tools.
advanced tool.
Yeah, we have more advanced tool to understand it.
That's true. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. In regards to what Ibn Taymiyyah said, I understand what you're referencing.
You know the particular reference I'm
I understand. I know the reference that
seen
you're talking.
the
It's like
diagrams.
tying your turban. Yeah,
I've
that's
seen
the shape.
diagrams, the earth is rotating and the
Yeah.
sunlight is,
The thing is that here's how I would disagree, and Ibn Taymiyyah is much higher than me in respects to knowledge, but how I would disagree with him in the sense is that he is suggesting that because we don't know if this is correct how you're referencing it, because I haven't actually read precisely that particular comment that you mentioned. I did read the other one though. And then that we don't know what it means yet. I would disagree with that because I do not think that particular ayah in question was one of those that was classified as one of the ones with the hidden meanings. For instance, like that wasn't one of them. And I think that it's, from my understanding, from my research, I have never seen any of the ones mentioning physical phenomenon classified under there at all. So
what are you trying to imply?
what I'm trying to imply is that if we're not sure of it, right, or if, say, Ibn Taymiyyah wasn't sure of it, okay, then we should try to look for other scholarly opinion that can try to solidify whether that ayah in particular has a very particular meaning based on the Quran and the Sunnah.
I can give another example from a hadith where I think there's one hadith where Rasulullah said
Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
that shaitan
Uh-huh.
runs in our body like how the blood runs or flows. At that time, it was not an established fact that blood actually flows in our body.
Okay.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of the collectors of hadith, I'm not sure whether it was Bukhari or Muslim, in the translation or the explanation of the hadith, he also said, look, this is a Sahih hadith, I am satisfied with the asnad and with the narrators and ra'i and everything. I'm not too sure what exactly is the matan, what exactly it means. But since it is evidence that Rasulullah said it, so we take it as a Sahih hadith. So even there are other scholars who do not understand certain things, but they still maintain it. And today we know blood is actually running in our body and flowing.
I'm going to continue going. Okay, I'm gonna keep sticking to my one principle here because I think it's the strongest argument. I don't think, even despite what some of the scholars have said in regards to these things, I think the strongest opinion here, and this is just also from what I understand what some of the other scholars have said, is that it needs to be understood based on the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. And if they did not understand that ayah, then the Quran was not clear to them, which is false. And I think that those ayahs in particular have never been mentioned as being unclear or as purposely or talking about the unseen or talking about the special letters, etc. This is not, those particular ayahs were not classified under them.
Let's have tea at 5 o'clock.
Yeah. So I am trying to be wary because I do not want to ascribe any interpretation that the Prophet ﷺ would have not, have ascribed to. That would be very difficult.
You are in a quite dangerous territory as well, because there were a lot of things not done during the Prophet's time, which
Mhm.
we're doing it today.
Yes, but that's a fiqh
The
issue.
Quran was not even a book during Rasulullah's time. We did
True.
it. Why?
There was nothing prohibiting it. But that's different from interpretation. That's different between interpretation and keeping it together.
You are making a general rule of
No, I'm not making a general rule. I'm being very specific. I'm being very, 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 very specific. I'm talking about interpretation. I'm talking about tafsir. I'm not talking about how the book is preserved. I'm talking specifically about how to interpret the ayahs. This is a very specific thing. Excuse me.
How are you going to understand what Rasulullah himself understand
Mhm.
about the Quran?
How do we understand?
How are we going to learn to understand what Rasulullah and his Sahaba understand about the Quran?
Well, we first off, obviously we look at for the ulama as well, but we also look at the historical context in which they live, and we try to understand the atmosphere in which they live, the environment in which they live, the culture in which they live. That's why we also study the seerah. Okay, so for instance, when I was mentioning to you regarding the earthquakes, prior to giving you this information, I actually researched whether earthquakes occur within the region. Secondly, I also researched whether there were mountainous regions in the area. Okay, and then third, I came to the conclusion that I did, given the fact that it's very commonsensical and that it's more simple of the explanations than saying the plate tectonics and everything like this, and it's something that the Arabs would have easily understood. So in a way, I'm implying this concept, I guess you call it Occam's razor. Anybody heard of Occam's razor? It's a scientific principle that you accept the more simple explanation over the more complex one. If the simple explanation fits, then you take it. In regards to the Quran, actually one of the main principles that many have suggested is that prior to looking into the internal meanings, you take the face value meaning first, right? And before you go into what it could mean otherwise. So I know I'm being simplistic. I'm not trying to limit your minds
I'll
here.
give you one more example.
Okay, go for it.
Iram,
Huh?
the city of Iram.
Okay.
No one knew ever before.
Mhm.
Tell me, what does Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam understand about city of Iram?
Even Rasulullah.
Even Rasulullah and Sahaba.
Yeah.
No
This
one
one-
ever knew about city of Iram. The translators were confused that it was a city or probably a man, like how Israel was.
Mhm.
You know, Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam was given the title of Israel, which later becomes the country. No one ever knew until they had this excavation in 1956.
Mhm. In regards to historical events, now we're talking about historical
This
phenomena.
historical event is also scientific.
Are we
it's
talking about,
also-
how is it scientific? I'm sorry,
Because
that's,
it's facts.
okay,
It's about civilization.
Mhm.
It's about lessons.
okay.
And it's the truth that these people exist.
Mhm.
Their existence.
Yes.
How is that not scientific?
No, I don't think it's scientific. Archaeology is not, I'm trying to say is that historical events are not scientific. They're never classified as science. When we're talking about, okay, let me make the distinction here. We're talking about history, okay? We mentioned certain cities, certain people. We're still mentioning people and cities. Just something very simple to understand. There are many cities in the Quran that were mentioned, that were destroyed. Okay, the ruins of, we don't know how the people lived there. It only is referenced in the Quran itself. However, it's still understandable. There are also prophecies in the Quran regarding the conquest of where?
You are talking about cities and civilization which were known.
Mhm.
Iram was a lost city.
The lost city.
It was a lost city. No one ever knew about it. And I've read the tafsir. Some ulama were not even sure whether this was a city or probably a person.
Okay.
I thought it must be a city somewhere, city of Iram, this guy was there, so it's mentioned as city of Iram. And
Mhm.
eventually the author of Quran beat them all when
Okay.
the city of Iram was found in
I see.
Muscat in Oman. And,
Well, in this regard, I'm going to take the safe route and say I don't know. Okay? But the reason that I've been objecting regarding the scientific phenomenon is because I honestly don't believe that they would be, and I'm talking not about knowledge as in knowing, but also the lack of understanding would have been there. I don't think they would have understood anything near what we imply regarding these phenomenon anymore. So for instance, plate tectonics, once again, there is no way that they would have possibly understood within that single ayahs.
Look at embryology.
Yeah.
Everyone understood that from a sperm, it became alaqa, mudghah. Fine, it is totally understood. But today we have more information about that. So what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with having more information.
But
I don't think that we should apply that onto the Quranic message, because I don't think it was revealed in that way. I think it was revealed only in a vague fashion for them to understand. So I'm like I said, I'm wary, even though these things are factual, many things are factual from a scientific perspective, I'm still wary, because there are many things that, okay, and I'll give you one example of a scientific phenomenon that occurred in the past century that people had no clue about. Theory of relativity. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody saw it coming at all that time was relative. Nobody had any clue that that was going to happen. And the fact that was revealed, completely eclipsed everything that we understood about time prior. We thought it was linear. For that, now we know it curves, and it depends on where you are, and and the type of atmosphere you are in the universe, and it can change. And now quantum physics is even suggesting that different dimensions can change the whole content of time, and that time itself might actually be a physical property. I mean, this is, we're getting to a point now where our whole understanding completely changes, and I'm concerned that it will do it again. And I don't want to put that burden onto the revelation when it doesn't need to be there. The Quran never needed it before, and it doesn't need it now. That's what I'm trying to say. The Quran was fine by itself. It was valid by itself. It proved itself without without need for science, and it can still do it. And I don't think that we should try to move in that direction.
Play it safe.
Yeah, I mean, we're playing it safe because, like I said, I'm trying to have a really balanced position here. I'm trying to say at one point that it's not wrong, but at the same time, I would, you kind of don't put your foot, it's okay to put your feet in the water, but if there's a shark there, there's only a few more times before it bites you. So all I'm trying to say is dangerous. That's it. So I will not object if you wish to continue doing it. However, I would suggest, as a brother, just be extremely careful. Be extremely careful.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Just now you said we should understand Quran as what Sahabat understand the Quran. What about the ayat Washamsu tajri li mustaqarrin laha? The meaning is, and the sun rises on its fixed course for a term.
Okay.
What do you think the companion understand about this ayat?
As a relative movement. It was understood relatively from the perspective of the individual. So they saw the sun moving. So we also say it today in English. The sun rises and falls. But we don't mean that. We don't mean that it literally goes up and down. We just say it because we can't, do you want to say the sun rises, or do you want to say, hey, the earth is turning on its axis? Here we go. Okay, it's that time now. No, I mean...
Yeah, but the verse says the sun, the moon, and the earth, yes, bahun, they're swimming in its orbit.
Yeah.
All three.
Okay.
How does Sahabat understand?
Do you want me to go into this? Okay. All right, the ancient Greeks, okay, and I will also mention why the Arabs probably already knew the earth was round prior. The ancient Greeks already understood the earth to be round, much, much earlier than any other civilization. Plato. Everyone else understood the earth flat concept is actually a myth. Very few civilizations actually believed the earth was flat. Most civilizations believed it was round. And the reason why was from basic observation. And what they would usually do is they would go to a high point, okay, like a mountain, and during the nighttime, if it's clear outside, you can actually see the curvature of the earth. Okay, it's very simple. You can also look up and you see the stars, you see the planets, they also have a shape. So they insisted and implied from that the earth must be likewise round. They also noticed throughout the seasons that the stars changed positions, even though they were standing in the same place. So they assumed from that the earth was also not stationary, or that the planets themselves were moving Okay, then the eclipses occurred and other such things. So they did have a notion that there was motion occurring within the planetary system, with the planetary objects, the celestial objects as they call them. So this was actually a commonsensical belief. Now they didn't prove it, of course, until later, until it was actually observed directly or based on the shadow of from the sightings of the moon. But what I'm trying to say is that what we understand now, yes, it's been confirmed, and we have all the mathematical equations, we have the very advanced theories to explain it, but they had an inkling. They understood that there had to be, the truth of the matter was that yes, the earth was round and that there was movement. So they had a basic understanding, a very basic understanding. So yes, it doesn't contradict what we understand now. It's very consistent. But at the same time, it's not what the Quran was not saying what we're saying about that. So that's all I'm trying to say is we don't apply our language and our theories to these passages. We just understand them on that factual basis of observation. That's it. That's it. Just leave it there. Because it doesn't do anything, it doesn't have any benefit anyway to suggest that, oh, this is talking about the theory of whatever. It is no benefit at all. There's absolutely zero benefit because the Quran was not sent for that purpose. The Quran was sent to make us more ethical, to remind us of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make us more devout, etc., etc. It was not meant to tell us about, this abstract theory in the future or this or that. So, and the companions and the Prophet ﷺ were not motivated because of these things. They were motivated because of the purpose for these things, the reason for their existence. So that's what I'm trying to say, is that we should interpret it from that understanding, because when the Prophet ﷺ recited these ayahs and the companions heard them, they were reflecting on them in a way that was beneficial for their souls. They were reflecting on them in a way that, oh, Allah has given me so much. Allah has done so much for me. Allah is so powerful. Allah is so intelligent. So they were reflecting on His attributes. They were reflecting on His attributes. And they're reflecting on the purpose of that creation. So they weren't thinking, oh, the symmetry of the earth is so nice, or, oh, I didn't know that before. That's awesome. If you look at the seerah, they didn't talk about physical phenomenon in this way at all, in any scientific or sort of, very blunt or cold fashion. They only talked about things in a very poetic, very purposeful, teleological manner. Okay, so I'm still going to stick to my guns, that I'm not going to move. And I'm not trying to be stubborn, I'm trying to be careful. Like I said, I do not want to apply unnecessary terminology or unnecessary things to what the Quran itself says. I think what the Quran says is enough in that respect. And I'm going to leave it there, and I'm not going to go any farther. So, okay. Can we go to number 3? Sorry. Number 3. We got 3 more to go. It's okay. Alhamdulillah. Okay, evidence is necessary for any belief to be justified and explained. Science offers the only reliable form of evidence and explanation. Theism and religion are beliefs, therefore only scientific evidence can justify theism and religion. Similar to the previous argument, it's self-refuting because this is not scientifically evidenced. That's it. So it fails in that same respect. Can you prove that science offers the only reliable form of evidence and explanation? No, because I'm sure that the explanation for that is not scientific. I'm sure the evidence for that is also not scientific. But you'll hear it often, atheists will say this. They say, yes, we can prove science with science because science works. But that's a circular argument, and it's not scientific. In fact, what they're saying is pragmatic. It's pragmatism. It's a philosophical position. They're saying what works is true. But that's not a scientific position. That's their philosophy being imposed upon science. So in fact, that's not a proof at all. Okay? Go to number 4, please. Okay. Okay, I love this one the most, actually, refuting. Is claim that God is all-powerful and all good. If God were all-powerful, He could prevent evil from happening. If God were all good, He would not allow evil to exist. A moral person cannot rely on or follow God that cannot prevent evil or does not want to, and evil exists, therefore God is either not all-powerful, etc., etc. We read this before, and it's a very simple argument to defeat. First off, premise 2 and 3 are questionable. Premise 2 and 3 are questionable. If God were all powerful, he could prevent evil from happening. Meaning, okay, but the question is why? Why would he want to? So then it goes into the second one. So okay, fine, you want to admit that? He's all powerful, but he doesn't want to. So that means he must not be all good. That's false. Why is that false? In the Quran it says very specifically, remember when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made Adam? What did the angels say? Response.
Yes.
Will you create
Check blood.
that will shed blood? And then what did Allah respond with?
I know.
He said, I know what you do not. I know what you do not. So our perception, the very easy way out of this argument is this. Our perception of good and evil is relative to us. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees is much greater. So by his knowledge, what he could be allowing is actually quite good. See, what we see is only within this context. He sees from past, present to future. He sees the entire benefits of good actions, and he sees the entire consequences of bad action. And if an atheist were to argue, well, there's so much evil in the world, I would respond and say, are you sure? Because if there was more evil than good, would we still be here? Is it possible that we could live in a universe where there's more evil than good, when evil is a destructive force? I would say that the world is balanced. It's balanced, perfectly balanced. So in the suggestion that God is neither all-powerful or all-good, thus mankind should be apatheistic or should not care for his existence, is also false. It's also what we call a non sequitur. Non sequitur in philosophy means does not follow. It does not follow that we should not care just because he may be these things, which is not true anyway. Okay, there could be many reasons to care why God exists. It's a very arbitrary thing to say that. So, one more? Okay. So P3 is the questionable one here. Science had to reject religious dogma for science to advance. Society had to reject religious dogma for science to advance. This is historically inaccurate. Okay, this is based on a myth. You'd have to study up more on that to understand why, but I will give you just some brief examples. The majority of the world is religious. The majority of the world is religious. Okay? And given that, you would think that those societies with a large religious population would be against scientific advancement. However, you see quite the opposite. I will give you one example, Iran. Iran is considered to be a very religious society in many respects, at least compared to a secular society it is. They have the highest rate of scientific advancement in the world. Okay, 120% per year. 120% scientific output per year. That's incredible. And it's because of their pragmatic need to defend themselves. All right, so there are multiple factors that may impede or promote scientific advancement. It's not always religious, and it's not always religious people. In fact, there have been a lot of atheists who have done the exact same thing when it suits them politically or it suits them financially. So this is a very simple argument, and it's something that can be proven with just a few examples. Most atheists just say this without actually giving any evidence. They usually just, it's just something they read in the books, and then they repeat the same thing over and over again. One more. The argument for secularism. This is one that's very important as well. Religion predominantly causes violence and sectarianism. We've already discussed this earlier, and I gave you some examples as to why this wasn't true. If you'd like, we can go into this further, but religion in and of itself cannot cause anything. Human beings tend to do this. Human beings are the cause for mostly everything in this world. We have will, we have free will, we decide what we want to do. And in fact, I can prove this using current statistics on terrorism. And I love to get into this argument. Actually, I love this argument because when I see the face on the atheists after I deal with them, it's very nice. The majority of terrorists recorded, that have been surveyed, et cetera, have often listed themselves as not religious prior to committing the acts that they do. For instance, I will give you the 19 hijackers in the 9/11 attacks. The day prior to the attacks, they were going to strip bars and drinking alcohol. Okay, they did not go to the masjid. They were not part of the community. They were known to be extremely secular. There was a recent study done about ISIS. This is actually quite funny. You're going to laugh about this, but the majority of members from the Western societies joining ISIS, they found out what their main purchases were before they went overseas. And they found that the number one book that they purchased before they go overseas is Islam for Dummies. I'm not kidding you. The number one book that is sold to ISIS members before they join ISIS is Islam for Dummies. And most of them come from secular education, secular institutions. They have very little religious background. They know very little about their faith. And they go over there because, usually for political reasons, because of the prejudice they face in society, et cetera, and they try to validate it through religious justification. But most of the terrorists that have been caught or otherwise killed, or otherwise have joined groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, have typically been on the lower end of the spectrum of religiosity. I'll give you more evidence. They have found in Western societies that Muslims who study in madrasas or traditional Islamic education are less likely to join terrorist groups. They have also found that a current survey conducted about 2 years ago in the United States was asked among different religious groups in the United States, Christians, atheists, Jews, and Muslims, okay, is it ever justifiable to kill civilians? Is it ever justifiable to kill civilians? Muslims rank the lowest. Muslims in the community in the United States said no, it is never justifiable. They were the majority in the statistic to say this. Christians, Jews, and atheists were reported higher as suggesting that it was okay sometimes to do it, whereas Muslims said no. Okay, there are numerous statistics you look online, and I recommend going to a website. I should have put it up on here. It's called loonwatch.com. I'm going to spell it out to you. L-O-O-N, Loon. I know it's a strange name. You'll find out when you get there why it's called this. L-O-O-N, watch, like watch somebody, okay, or watch.com. It's a news site that tries to go against Islamophobia. They also conduct, they also gather all the recent terrorism reports and surveys, etc. They found that globally, 98% of Muslims do not commit acts of terrorism or fanaticism. They found in the United States, 94% of Muslims do not commit acts of terrorism or fanaticism. And they found that the majority of people who commit acts of terrorism and fanaticism are actually, in fact, secular individuals. This is not to say that all people living in secular societies are bad. However, most of the reasons that people commit these acts of terrorism are for secular reasons. And I'll give you one more example. Suicide bombing was not created by Muslims. Suicide bombing was created by a group called the Tamil Tigers. They're a secular separatist group who use suicide bombing for political gain. In Sri Lanka, most of them were atheists, by the way.
But before them, I think they were Japanese fighters.
They were?
Harakiri.
The kamikaze pilots, yeah. Kamikaze pilots who worship their emperor, like Fraun, was worshipped, committed suicide for the sake of honor and to kill their infidels, So these things were happening way before Muslims even started doing it. And in fact, it's still a rarity in the Muslim world compared to other groups. So, in fact, the truth of the matter is that media has made this into a much bigger issue than it is because it needs an enemy. So it dehumanizes Muslims, it makes them look extremely bad. And it always tries to emphasize the worst elements of our society in order to perpetuate this idea that we're all evil or that we're all capable of terrorism, when in fact we actually rank quite low on that scale. In fact, ISIS is probably the largest fanatical group that has existed in quite some time, and even they are proportionately less likely to cause most violence than the United States. The United States is more capable of killing people than ISIS ever will be. And in fact, the United States has killed more people than ISIS in the past year. So, and I mean civilians, not soldiers. So, also, sectarianism. What is sectarianism? It means causing divisions, correct? Okay. Let me give you a hint. What do you think causes more division? Religion? Various religions claim to be true, right? Okay. Now, which society institutionalizes division? I'll give you... Huh? What? You didn't say anything? Okay, I thought you said something. Okay. In a traditional Islamic polity or an Islamic caliphate, okay, we have multiple systems of governance. One for the Muslims, several different ones for the non-Muslims. Is this correct? Yes, even criminal courts for different... Jews had one, Christians had their own, even Zoroastrians at one point had their own, etc., etc. The Ottomans exemplified this as well in the millet. So, however, secular societies impose one law on everyone. On everyone. Okay? Despite your beliefs, regardless of your Muslim, Christian, Jew, regardless if you want this or that. They impose the same law on everyone. Some sort of civil law. So which one is more capable of causing problems? A system that allows different laws for different groups, or a system that imposes one legal standard on everyone for the worst offenses?
I will say one system, but Sharia.
The Sharia. Well, I mean, but so in regards to non-Muslims under a Sharia-run system, typically non-Muslims had much more freedom, not just in terms of how they believe, but in how they practice. And what I mean by practice is applying their religious views in a judicial manner. Whereas in secular societies, we can't even whip people for committing adultery.
Yeah, but if you steal 2 ringgit slipper, you get same jail by either with the people who steal 2 So that's even more stupid.
That's even worse. And you get put in the same cell. You might have stolen like a candy bar, not a candy bar, but something like,
2 ringgit slipper.
A 2 ringgit slipper, okay. And then you go in and, there's a murderer you have to sleep with. It's like, why am I in the same location with this man? So it's a very unfair, it's unjust system in that sense. And secular societies have a very long history of violence. You can also see the French Revolution. I'm sure if you've read about the history of the French, it's probably one of the bloodiest revolutions in history, where they literally slaughtered thousands of clergy and religious people who don't follow the state. And it has occurred, especially within even contemporary societies like the United States and Europe. We have countless riots, especially race riots. There's a lot of racial division because of cultural clashes, because of different religious beliefs. And that is because the secular ideologies tend to want to impose one law onto everyone. That is the principle, and it's usually humanistic sort of laws. Okay, and they may pay tribute to certain religions, like for instance, here, they may say, well, Islam is a religion of the state, but it doesn't necessarily play out that way, especially if you go to the courts, you'll notice that. So those are some arguments that you can use in response to this. So that was number 6. I believe that's the last one. What time do we have? Okay, lovely. We have 4. So we have about 30 minutes. So I'm going to leave that to the audience then for question and answer sessions. You've asked enough questions. I'm joking. You can ask whatever you want. Okay. So if you would like to ask anything regarding the subject at hand, or if you would like to ask regarding anything else, I will. Is that for you or for me?
No, for you.
Oh, really? Thank you so much.
You ask me questions too.
Yeah, you want me to ask questions? Okay. So I am willing to answer. If you would like to debate some more, I'm okay with that too. Like I said, I take no offense. It's all a game to me. So please don't be shy. Ask whatever you wish, even if, like I said, it's not related to the subject. And if I don't know, I'll say I don't know. Okay, I'm not ashamed to do that. So, yes, ma'am.
Let's say a government has different set of laws, Islamic law and non-Islamic law. If let's say a non-Muslim kill a Muslim, how we want to punish this non-Muslim?
From what I understand, and I could be incorrect, but from what I've read and I understand about this, if a non-Muslim attacks a Muslim or commits a crime against a Muslim, the Sharia is applied to that individual, which actually acts as a deterrent to the non-Muslims to attack the Muslims in any way, shape, or form. So likewise, however, I've heard some people express the opinion that if a Muslim attacks a non-Muslim, likewise, laws will be applied to them from the other side, and even the non-Muslims can choose if that person should be punished by Sharia if the Sharia is harsher. So in some ways it's very fair. There are other scholars who suggest that in any case the Muslim is always punished by Sharia. And there are a minority of scholars who suggest that Sharia is applied onto all Muslims. However, that's actually minority opinion. Oh, non-Muslims, excuse me. So, however, the system that we are talking about is much more pluralistic. It's much better because not only does it allow you to express your beliefs in your own private sphere, but it also allows you to actually live out your beliefs in full compliance to whatever religious law that you wish to follow, which is unlike all the secular nations which only allow you to live based on what? Secular legal systems. So. Yes, ma'am.
You share that when people use science in Quran, some of the Muslims become doubt of Quran. Can you share what's the argument, the examples of argument?
Okay. Actually, in many instances when many Muslims use this argument that there are scientific miracles in the Quran, and they go debate with atheists, the atheists who tend to be more obsessive about scientific phenomenon, they will cite inconsistencies in the Quranic narrative based on a lot of details that are much more different than how the Quran suggests. That's why I said the Quran suggests a very foundational, very basic level of understanding. However, a lot of Muslims come in who use this argument and imply that the whole theory is being expressed there. Whereas then, the atheist responds and says, no, see, look at this. Look at this difference. You see this? This is different. Did the Quran say this? No, it doesn't. I can't think it. So they go on and on and on. So that's why I think it's dangerous in that sense. There's also an ayah in the Quran that says that the earth and the heavens were split apart. So people assume this means the Big Bang. However, most atheists that I have encountered and seen argue with individuals who promote this view have also shown that in the past there were many other religious beliefs or other religions, even pagan views, that had the same view in their own scriptures. So they will suggest that, oh, the Quran copied from that then, which is false. But what I'm trying to say is that there are certain things in the Quran, physically speaking, that are very basic understanding. We should leave them that way. If we try to imply anything else on there, the atheists will typically pick it apart based on the minute details. And this can be very, very difficult for especially a lot of converts to deal with when they base their entire understanding of the validity of the Quran on science alone. This is very problematic because the Sahabi and the Prophet ﷺ didn't see the Quran in that way, did not validate the Quran in that way. So, any other questions?
So Quran is a book of science.
It's a book of science, but not a book of science. Yes, I've heard that before. So that's very good. Gentlemen?
Let's say Sahaba feel, they understand Quran and they feel wonderful of Quran because of the miracle in the language. Does it mean we should learn Arabic until we can feel the miracle of language of Quran?
Yes, we should always try to strive to learn Arabic. Even myself, I'm trying. I mean, it's difficult to learn a language. This is something, but we are capable of it. We should continue striving no matter how difficult it may be. However, to understand the miracle of the Quran, we don't need to understand Arabic, actually. To fully experience that miracle, yes. But to understand the miracle, to know why it's a miracle, the Quran itself, we don't need the Arabic. In fact, all we need to do is understand the context in which it was revealed, what the Quran is, and the challenge that it issues towards the non-believers, which it says is try to produce a surah like it. And what we understand by this is, first off, the Quran is a recitation. Yes, it was written down by the companions, and it was written down eventually and compiled into one book. However, from the Prophet ﷺ's tongue, okay, it was an immediate revelation. It was impossible to conjure up anything like that over the period of time that he did, that was always coherent, non-contradictory, that flowed in a rhythmic pattern, okay? And another thing that's interesting about it was that it was revealed in a certain context at certain times, history, meaning that each ayah had a specific context in which it was revealed, okay? And every ayah is contextualized and has meaning based on other ayahs in the Quran as well. So when you say, when the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, make another surah like it, He's not just saying, give me a few lines. No. He's telling us, or He's telling the kuffar, that you need to produce something like a surah, but in every ayah, that ayah has meaning based on every other passage in the Quran as well. Does that make sense? So it's not just, it doesn't just have one meaning in that particular, it's also contextualized based on all the other surahs and the other ayahs in the Quran. So that very surah itself has so much meaning, and it's so coherent, and it doesn't contradict anything else in the Quran. Is that possible? Is it possible, without writing it down, without having contemplated over it over a long period of time, being taught by somebody? Remember, the Prophet ﷺ was also unlearned. He had no knowledge of many of the things prior, especially from other scriptures. So these people need to meet these conditions. So today, when you tell an atheist to meet the condition, they go, okay, I'll be right back. So they go get a piece of paper. They start writing. That's already number one wrong, because the Prophet didn't do that. It didn't happen that way. He didn't. It wasn't. He didn't. So, oh, what should I write today? No, that's not what happened. It was revealed to him immediately. He recited it. He memorized it, and that was it. And it went into the collection of his memory. And it continued on for years and years and years and years and years. So this phenomenon, I think, is impossible for any human to fabricate at all. It's impossible. I'm hoping to get into more detail about that actually tomorrow. So, very quiet. Anybody have any questions regarding the arguments or any of the beliefs that we mentioned here? I know it's a very complex subject, so if you need clarification now, please ask now, because when we move on tomorrow, I'm not going back to this. Thank you.
So brother, do you think that Quran can be approached with from different angles? For example, like the time of Prophet and Sahaba, is the linguistic that attracts the people? How in this current era is the scientific facts that attract the people? Because you cannot deny some of the scientists become Muslim because of the science.
The problem is that the problem that I have with that position, and I've heard it before as well, is that there's so much benefit in doing da'wah like this because of the fact that it's bringing people into Islam. But I've heard more apostates say that they left Islam because of that. So I really have a hard time seeing the benefit when the same people who are apostating from the religion are using it as an argument against Islam. So it's very difficult to find, I don't think the Quraysh, the pagans, never said the linguistic, the amazingness of the way the Quran is, that's something we don't like about Islam. No, they loved it. They thought the Quran was beautiful. This is something that was appeasing to them, even though they rejected it out of their own pride. But nowadays, the non-Muslims, and especially the apostates, are laughing at the way that we're constructing these arguments. And they're leaving the religion and trying to use our arguments against us to show how stupid, our religion is. And I use that in quotations because I'm not being literal, I'm trying to emphasize what they say. So it's difficult for me to see a benefit in it because of that. And that's one of the reasons that I'm arguing against the position, is because that's one of the main ones that I hear come up every time in these discussions. Like, oh, you people think there are miracles in your holy book, these scientific miracles, and they construct articles and every day trying to refute this, and it looks quite foolish. And that's another reason you mentioned that doctors have converted to Islam because of scientific miracles. I will tell you that Hamza Sortzes himself stopped using the argument because he realized, after having debated so many times, that it was not a good position to have. And in fact, I actually discussed with him when he released that article refuting his previous position. He suggested that he didn't take I want to be fair to him, because he said he never took a full, he never embraced the argument fully. But he did believe in some aspects of the Quran having scientific miracles. But he later retracted it. He said, I can't do this anymore, because he knows it was a very flimsy position to have. So he no longer uses it at all. If you look at his latest lectures, he's completely against that now. He doesn't even go into it at all. Doesn't mention embryology, doesn't do anything like this. He just goes, he's actually mentioned some of the arguments that I mentioned. The fitra, he mentions cosmology, design, things like this. So, and he's a much higher figure in that respect. And so, anybody else have any questions? Once again, yep.
I think majority of us here, coming here, to get some knowledge about atheism, and to understand this group of atheists, so that we can have a better understanding how to da'wah to them. But at one point of your lecture, you mentioned that after all this lengthy discussion and argument, you said something like very difficult to use. Don't use this. This is not the best. It's not the best way for da'wah. But the best way of da'wah is by good manners.
Yes.
Okay. And then on the other end, I just want to compare, make simple analogy with science and the applied science. Science, let's say for example electricity, about the electron, neutron, whatever things, this is science behind it. But applied science is just, I need the lamp there, the light, the switch on, I use it. So for this particular lecture, very good lengthy discussion and argument. However, for me, I want the applied the application of this in terms of da'wah to non-Muslims.
Okay. As for your first one, I still stick to my opinion that good character is the best form of da'wah. Now, at the same time, I don't think that I've completely made my arguments irrelevant, because I wouldn't be standing here otherwise. I'm not trying to be contradictory, but I said the human heart is more susceptible to accepting truth than the human mind. That's always been the case. So when people see a good moral person, they're more attracted to the truth that they have to offer as a result of that. This doesn't mean that intellectual arguments are ineffective, however. Intellectual arguments can help to break down the mind to the point where it needs to rely on the heart in order to accept a faith. So we have to utilize both, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us not only to purify ourselves, to make ourselves better, but He also asks us to reflect. We have minds and we have hearts in order to be completely human. So we must utilize both of those at all times. And in the same way, and I mentioned what Imam Malik said again, just to emphasize this point, without Sharia, you cannot have tasawwuf, and without tasawwuf, you cannot have Sharia. Okay, one is an application of real world, of using rationality and reason, fiqh, to understand the problems that we're facing. Okay, it's a science. Tasawwuf is a science of the heart. But if you have one without the other, you either fall into heresy or what? Kufr, right? So, you cannot just do tasawwuf without sharia, because then you just become, without any reflection, you just become, very flimsy with everything, very liberal, right? And you cannot have the sharia without tasawwuf, because you become hard and cold. You become without mercy, right? You can use your morals. So we always have to have a balance in this respect. Now, the second thing that you mentioned, actually, can you repeat one more time the second question? Oh, applied science. You want to know how to apply these arguments. Okay, in this first session, I have given you some counter responses to some of these arguments. So I have given you some practical means in order to debate. However, the main reason for today was simply to express their beliefs and to express their main arguments and where they come from, so that you have a full understanding of exactly who they are and how they perceive things. And this will better you for tomorrow, because tomorrow we're actually going to be learning the methods of debate, atheist psychology, how to apply certain things, how to counter the arguments in an appropriate fashion, what sort of manners to use, when to see if the argument is valid or not valid. Okay, so that when you enter into discussion with an atheist, you know exactly what to expect and you know how to respond. So I'm giving you some of those practical means right now through argumentation, like counter arguments, like the one I mentioned in the last session, okay, like for the existence of God and things like this. However, I have yet to go into the methodology and how to apply it in full, which we'll get into tomorrow, and I hope it's going to be fun for you. It's going to be a little bit more technical tomorrow, because we're going to be discussing a lot of different philosophical terminologies and things like this. But when you utilize them, when you memorize them, and you go into a debate, and you go in using these things that I've taught you, you should come out very effectively. In the very least, you may not convert these people, but you will prevent other Muslims from listening to them. Do you understand? Which is actually one of the purposes for this as well. And I'm going to give you a very, maybe you consider this shocking, but my concern for da'wah against atheists, or for atheists, is not to convert atheists. I am not trying to teach you how to convert atheists. I know this sounds strange. Okay? That is up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah guides who He wills. Okay? No matter how much you try, you're not going to convert anyone. Okay? It's up to them, and it's up to, Allah wants them to. All right? I am trying to give you the means to prevent yourself and to prevent those nearest to you from going in that direction. That is my major concern. My major concern is stopping people from apostating, not bringing people to Islam. I want people to come to Islam. I'm saying this is rewarding. This is something that we should aspire to do. But the problem that we're facing now in our society is a lack of religiosity, and it's a lack of Islam within our own community. And before we can start thinking about converting the kuffar who are not in our society, we need to stop our own members from going over to them. So that we can actually have a leg to stand on. Because if they say, oh, why should we join your religion when your own people are coming over to our side? What are we going to respond? Oh, we don't care about them? We care more about you?
See, that statement is very common among the Aborigines in Malaysia. It says, why should I become a Muslim? Look at you all. Are you Muslim? Yeah.
Exactly.
You don't keep your time.
Precisely. So I mean, in the same way, we need to be more concerned about our brothers and sisters before we're concerned about the kuffar. Okay? Because they will actually, if they deconvert, if they become apostates, not only damaging themselves, but they're damaging our societies. Because the apostate, or the munafiqun, or the khawarij, all these people who are outside the fold of Islam are more dangerous to us than the kuffar. They're much more dangerous to us. They can cause much more damage. So we need to, first off, facilitate the healing of our own society. We need to put a band-aid on it first. We need to make sure that less people leave the religion, and then after we stabilize the situation, we can focus on the outside. So I'm not asking you to go to Europe and start debating with atheists. Okay? But trust me, that'll be very unsuccessful. There are so many of them there, and they have a very strong following. They're most likely not going to listen to you, especially when they're having such an easy time taking our brothers and sisters over to their side. So we need to focus on our own community first. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure my question is related to tomorrow's session, but my question is basically like for the atheists who is using science as their basis, and let's say if you're having some debate with them, and my question is, should the person who is going to debate with the atheists who are using the science as their basis, should the person who is going to debate with him have the I say technical knowledge or that knowledge on that area of science, basically?
The area of science. The only time that science comes into the discussion is when either an atheist wants to prove something against what he perceives as a scientific error on your part, or when they want to say that science is sufficient for me, I don't need to believe in God. So for instance, they might bring up evolution or something like this. However, you don't necessarily need to, I wouldn't say that you need to know all the technical information of certain scientific phenomenon and theories in order to debate with an atheist. Because most of the time that atheists debate, even though they use science as their foundation, they don't use, it rarely actually comes up as a argument against you. They will say that they need scientific evidence. So as long as you understand that concept, what constitutes the scientific evidence, what constitutes the science in general, you should be able to debate sufficiently with an atheist. Because I will tell you this, there are many atheists who are very good at science, but there are also majority of them who are very bad, who don't even understand science either. They just cling on to it because it's another way, in a way it's sort of like another religion. It's easier for them to have some sort of certainty in. Okay, so they cling on to an ideology of science, scientism. They don't, even if they don't understand the most basic concepts in evolution or the most basic concepts of the Big Bang, etc., they will cling to it because it has proven results and that it shows itself as being in opposition to religion. So, and I'll get into that also regarding atheist psychology tomorrow. So, yes.
That's why you mentioned about Christianity. Christian believe God lost his Son of God. But what I understand, Christian believe Jesus, Son of God, is now with God the Father in heaven. So, I mean, God the Father is not lost, the Son is still there.
The problem is that in Christian theology, when Jesus was sacrificed, he died for 3 days. So the Son was dead. Dead. Like he's dead. He's not alive, he's dead. 3 days. Okay, so he wasn't existing for 3 days. So in that 3 days, God changed. That can't happen. So even if it's for 2 seconds, that means God was imperfect for 3 days. I can't accept that. So. Any more questions? We still have a little bit of time left, so feel free to throw anything at me. Like I said, it can be relevant to the discussion, maybe something indirectly related to it as well. Like I said, if you need any clarification, please ask now. On any of the subjects, yes.
What is your opinion about the evolution of language and its influence on the previous scriptures?
The influence of language. I meant the evolution of language and its influence on previous scriptures.
For example, the change of language from, you can see the root themes of language expands, right? So I was thinking about, like in the time of Adam, was it Arabic, which is the core, which is evolving into other languages? Or, when we talk about this, and I'm thinking about the Quran itself in the future, would it affect the Quran itself?
I don't know what the primordial tongue was prior to all our languages. I'm not a linguist. However, I would say that it will not affect the Quran in any sense, because the Quran is preserved in the form of Arabic. That is, even though we have all these dialects of Arabic, Arabs still know the difference between their dialect and Hausa, right?
The Bible was affected because of the translation from Aramaic
Mhm.
to Greek.
Yeah, and then also to Latin. Then even the word Jesus is not his real name. You know what Jesus' real name is in the Bible? It's like Yeshua. Yeah. So it's, yeah, people call him, I don't. So, yeah, there's a lot of loss in translation, especially within the Bible itself. Actually, there's one thing I want to mention too about the Bible. This is, I was speaking about this earlier with somebody else. There's actually a gospel, I think it's the Gospel of Matthew, okay? It's one of the synoptic gospels, all right? And the Gospel of Matthew, and at least in every gospel, there's a mention, there's a story prior to Jesus being supposedly crucified. There's a story where they go to Pontius Pilate, right? The Jewish rabbis, they bring Jesus to him and they say, we want him to be executed. So Pontius Pilate, who was the governor of the Jewish settlement at the time, he didn't want there to be a revolt. So he said, okay, let me let them choose instead. I want to calm them down. So he said, okay, I will give to you 2 men. You choose which one you want to be crucified or which one you want to be set free. All right. Now, interesting. If you read any Bible translation, you'll see this. He says, first, there's this man, Jesus, who is called the Christ. And then he points to another man. He says, and this man named Barabbas. Barabbas. Interesting, right? Now, what was Barabbas' first name? Barabbas' first name was also Jesus. Uh-oh. What does Barabbas mean in Hebrew or Aramaic?
Sons of consolation.
Bar is Ibn. Abbas is father. Okay? So Jesus, who is called the Christ, and Jesus, who is of the Father. Now, interestingly enough, the one who was released was Jesus Bar Abbas. Okay? And interestingly enough, in all the gospel accounts, Jesus never refers to himself as the Christ. He refers to himself as what? The Son of the Father. So who was released? And who was crucified? The Quran says it was made to look like. So the other one was killed, and the other one was taken up. That argument is actually from a revert to Islam by the name of Dr. Gerald Dirks. He was a reverend at Harvard University. He found that translation in the original documents, and he has been preserving that argument for some time now. I suggest you look him up. His name is Dr. Gerald Dirks.
School of Divinity.
Okay.
How's the spelling, brother? Spelling of that doctor?
Gerald.
G-R-A-L-D-L-I-R-K-S.
He knows. So you've seen him in the Dean show, right? No? Okay.
Can you please share with us your opinion about morality and ethics?
Morality and ethics?
Yes, the relation between morality and ethics with the belief of the existence of God.
Okay.
For example, the Japanese or Germans, they are very they have high morality and ethics.
Do they?
Yeah.
Are you sure about that?
I'm not sure, but in general, yeah. So what's your comment?
I would say that the Germans and the Japanese are very disciplined. They're very loyal to their culture. In that sense, they are considered to be moral because they're very consistent and they're very strict about their code of ethics. But I wouldn't call them moral in any degree. I mean, for instance, it's very well known that Japanese societies have a high rate of adultery and a high rate of sexualization. There was a report done recently that they sell sexual objects on the street to children, to people, I mean, very openly. You know, they're a very highly sexualized society, and they're a very materialistic society. I remember there was one time when I was younger, you never remember the PlayStation 2 came out? You remember that? A long time ago, right? PlayStation 2, we're like, what, we're at 4 now?
PlayStation
5? I don't remember. I haven't played in a while. Okay, so PlayStation 2, and they sold out on the first day in Japan, and some of the kids who couldn't get one, they committed suicide or jumping off buildings. That's their sort of society that they have. They consider it dishonorable not to have the same things as others. There's also, in terms of education, there's a high suicide rate in Japan because of how strict the education system is on the children. A lot of kids kill themselves because they can't stand the pressure, and if they get anything lower than an A, they don't compete, then they consider to be disowned or dishonored by the family, they kill themselves. It's a very common phenomenon. In Germany, there's a higher rate of xenophobia. Even after the Third Reich, after they killed a bunch of Jews, they still have a very high rate of xenophobia. They're still very racist against blacks and Muslims and Jews, very anti-Semitic. They're very hardworking, but they only care about themselves for the most part as a society. And I'm sorry to be very general. I mean, there are a lot of good Germans too, and some who convert to Islam, but in general, their culture is very much like this. And so let's go into the larger topic then, shall we? Every society has problems. So I can mention ones for the United States and Europe in general, and then even in Malaysia, if you want, I can talk about certain things. I won't to offend a lot of people in here, but let's mention morality and God. In what way do you want me to express my opinion? Do you want me to express how morality and ethics are justified by God, or how they become valid as a result of believing God?
It's the relation between the atheism and the religion. For me, we cannot separate between believing in God and religion.
Mm-hmm.
There's two levels: believing in God and choosing which type of religion is the best. I mean, the truth. So actually, the religion for me is the fruit of religion is morality and ethics.
Mm-hmm.
But they say, the atheism say, they can still achieve the highest level of morality and ethics, even though they don't believe in God and they don't have religion.
Okay.
Some of them, they produce high level of technology. They do a lot of charity,
Mm-hmm.
and they say that they make a better world without believing in God. So what was your comment?
That's very interesting. You've asked actually a number of questions in there. So do you want the Islamic response first or the philosophical one?
Philosophical.
Okay. The philosophical one is this. Atheists claim that they can be moral without the existence of a creator or legislator because they believe that they themselves determine values and morality. The problem with this is it's very highly subjective in the sense that just because a society derives values and morals or ethics or what they consider to be something good from themselves doesn't mean that others will agree to it. Okay? There's no valid reason for me to accept this society's version of morality just because they say they can. So if an atheist society says, okay, we want to live like this, but I decide I don't want to live like that, I want to live in a different society that has a different moral standard, who's to say that they're right and that I'm wrong, or that I'm right and they're wrong? What determines that? That's the first question I would ask. Because when you start saying that human beings are the ones who create legislation and morality and things like this, you may be describing descriptively what happens, but prescriptively, whether it should happen is another question. Because many societies who have not had any sort of higher standard or ideology often change very quickly, one, and they're often based on very materialistic needs and desires that can lead down the wrong path. And I'll give you an example. It is true that atheists these days argue that their societies are more enlightened, they're much better at charity and things like this. However, it's also very true that many atheist societies less than 100 years ago were committing mass slaughter on a scale unheard of in history. So I would ask the atheists, what's the distinction between that group and your group? What's the difference? Why was Stalin's Russia worse than your society now? Because for Stalin, he didn't care if he killed 1,000 people. It wasn't a big deal because he was still okay, and so were the people that he liked, right? So why is that wrong? Now, atheists may say because it's counterproductive, but Stalin might be like, well, he's not alive now, but he might be like, why is it counterproductive? I'm still alive. I'm still eating. My friends and family are okay. So what's the problem? What I'm trying to say is that an atheist can never justify their morality unless they point to some sort of higher standard. And usually you'll hear atheists suggesting something along the lines of rights, okay, human rights, or human productivity, or something of this sort. But in actuality, those are ideas. These are like ideals, like almost in the same way like God. That is the very thing that legislates the way that they behave, right? So atheists cannot escape a metaphysical or a philosophical grounding for their belief that it has some sort of supernaturalism tied to it. It may not be a deity, like a God, beyond physical time and space, but it might be an abstract concept that they themselves can't prove. So it may be like human rights, for instance. There are a lot of people who believe human rights like they actually exist. Human rights don't actually exist. Human rights are just drafted by societies on what they agree upon based on whatever standards they have elsewhere. But human rights itself is not, it doesn't exist somewhere in the sky, telling us how to live our lives. It's a completely arbitrary document, which, by the way, is violated on numerous occasions by the very same countries that drafted it. So it's highly arbitrary, and it's usually, and people exploit it all the time. So I would say that this is a much deeper discussion, actually, and it could take a couple of hours to discuss, because the philosophy of ethics is a huge field, and there are many numerous arguments in response to even what I've said. But that would be the basic answer. The Islamic answer is very simple. The Islamic answer says to these atheists who claim to be good, he says in Surah An-Nur, right? He says, they perceive their good deeds, right? Well, they think they're doing good, but actually what they see is a mirage in the desert. And when they get there, Allah will be waiting for them to hold them accountable. So it says that their deeds are like a mirage. They're not real, because they're not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the existential reality, the reality of existence, the very purpose for our existence. When an atheist claims that humanity is the purpose of existence, they turn that into their God. Humanism, they turn that into their God. They say scientific advancement is there, they turn that into their God. So the reality, the real God, the real one to be worshipped, is what validates morality based on Islamic ethics. So, I hope that was sufficient. We can talk more about it in the future. So it's a very big topic, actually. I can even give you some reading material, because ethics is one of the largest fields in philosophy, and it's still one of the most highly disputed, to be honest.
Is it possible for us to get copies of your slides?
Yes, you may have copies of my slide, though I was hoping, I should have told you this earlier, I don't really want to give my slides away, not because I don't want you sharing it, but because I feel as though you won't take notes if I tell you I'm going to give you my slides. And the best way to learn is if you take notes, because you're actually concentrating. If you're just sitting there waiting, oh, he'll give me my slides later, you'll be more passive, and you won't be as active in trying to memorize the material. But I will give you the slides, but I do hope that at least tomorrow, for those of you who are more lax about taking notes, if you can try, because tomorrow we're going to be going through a lot of material that you have to memorize. It's not an option. And if you don't understand the material, you're not going to be able to do what I'm hoping you can do by the end of this course. So. Okay. Anyone else? We done? Oh, okay. One last question, or that's it? All right, alhamdulillah.